Frank Sinatra was standing backstage at the Sands Hotel when Dean Martin walked past him without saying a word. Not a nod, not a glance. Just walked right past like Frank wasn't there. It was October 12, 1958. 20 minutes before they were supposed to go on stage together for the first show of a 2-week residency. 20 minutes before they were supposed to walk out in front of 800 people and be the Rat Pack. Be the kings of Las Vegas. Be best friends who made it look effortless. And Dean Martin had just walked past Frank Sinatra like he was invisible. Frank stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then he followed Dean to his dressing room. The door was closed. Frank opened it without knocking. Dean was sitting in front of his mirror, adjusting his bow tie. He saw Frank in the reflection but didn't turn around. "We need to talk," Frank said. "No, we don't." "Dean, what the hell is going on?" Dean stood up and turned to face Frank. "You really don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be asking." Dean walked over to the bar cart in the corner and poured himself a scotch. He didn't offer one to Frank. He called Jeanie. Frank blinked. "What, my wife?" "You called my wife. At our house, while I was out of town working." Frank's stomach dropped. He suddenly knew exactly where this was going. "Dean, that's not you called my wife and told her you were worried about me. You told her you thought I was drinking too much. You told her you thought I needed help. And then you suggested she talk to me about cutting back." Frank closed the door behind him. "I was trying to help." Dean laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. "You were trying to help, Frank. You called my wife behind my back and told her I had a drinking problem. How exactly is that helping? Because you do have a drinking problem. Everyone knows it. You're drunk on stage half the time. It's an act." Dean interrupted. His voice was quiet but dangerous. "It's an act, Frank. I play a drunk. That's the character. That's what people pay to see. But you can't tell the difference between the character and the real person. You think because I do a bit where I stumble around with a drink in my hand that I'm some pathetic alcoholic who needs an intervention." Frank took a step forward. "Dean, I've seen you. I've seen how much you actually drink. It's not just the act." Dean set his glass down hard on the table. "You've seen nothing. You know nothing about what I do or don't do. You're so busy playing God, trying to manage everyone's life, that you can't see what's right in front of you. I'm trying to be a friend. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference." They stood there, staring at each other. Frank had known Dean for 10 years. They had performed together hundreds of times. They had stayed up all night talking. They had covered for each other with wives and girlfriends and studio executives. They were supposed to be brothers. And now Dean was looking at him like Frank was a stranger. "I shouldn't have called Jeanie," Frank said finally. "You're damn right you shouldn't have. But I was worried about you. I am worried about you. Then talk to me. Don't go behind my back. Don't call my wife and tell her things that aren't true. Don't make me look like some drunk who can't control himself in front of the person whose opinion matters most to me." Frank sat down on the couch. "Does she think you have a problem?" "No, because I don't have a problem, but your call planted a seed. Now every time I have a drink at home, I can see her watching me, counting, wondering if you were right. You did that, Frank. You put that doubt in her head." Frank rubbed his face with his hands. "I'm sorry, that's not good enough. What do you want me to do?" Dean picked up his drink and finished it. "I want you to stay out of my personal life. I want you to stop trying to fix problems that don't exist. And I want you to understand that I'm not one of your employees. You don't get to manage me." There was a knock on the door. The stage manager's voice came through. 10 minutes. Gentlemen." Dean looked at Frank. "We've got a show to do. Are we okay?" Frank asked. "No, but we're professionals. So we're going to go out there and we're going to be funny and charming and everyone in that audience is going to think we're the best friends in the world. And then, when the show is over, you're going to leave me alone." They walked out of the dressing room together, side by side, neither of them speaking. They stood in the wings, waiting for their introduction. Frank could hear the audience applauding, where I could hear the band playing their entrance music, could feel the energy of 800 people who had paid good money to see Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. "Dean," Frank said quietly. Dean didn't look at him. "I really am sorry." Dean was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo what you did." The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Sands Hotel is proud to present Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin." The curtain opened, the spotlight hit them, and just like that, they transformed. Frank smiled his megawatt smile. Dean stumbled slightly, playing up the drunk bit, and the audience roared with laughter. They walked to center stage together, and to everyone watching, they were exactly what they were supposed to be. Two best friends having the time of their lives. The show was perfect, technically perfect. Every joke landed. Every song was flawless. Frank would sing and Dean would heckle him from the side. Dean would sing and Frank would pour him a drink that was really just apple juice. They did their bits. They riffed on each other. They made it look easy. But there was something missing. Something the audience probably couldn't identify but that Frank and Dean both felt. The warmth was gone. The genuine affection that usually existed between them had been replaced by professional courtesy. After the show, Frank tried to catch Dean in the hallway, but Dean was already gone. He had left through the back entrance, gotten in his car, and driven back to his suite at the Desert Inn. Frank stood there in the empty hallway, still in his tuxedo, and realized that he had made a serious mistake. He had crossed a line, and he didn't know how to uncross it. The 2-week residency continued. Every night, they did the show. Every night, they were brilliant. And every night, the moment the curtain closed, Dean would disappear. He stopped coming to Frank's suite after shows, stopped joining the group for late-night drinks, stopped taking Frank's calls during the day. Dean Martin had shut Frank Sinatra out completely, and Frank, who was used to being able to fix anything with a phone call or a grand gesture or sheer force of personality, couldn't fix this. On the last night of the residency, Frank decided to try one more time. He went to Dean's dressing room after the final show. Dean was packing up his things. "Dean, we need to settle this." Dean didn't stop packing. "There's nothing to settle." "Yes, there is. You're shutting me out. You won't talk to me. You won't even look at me except when we're on stage." "That's right. Why?" Dean finally stopped and turned to face Frank. "Because I'm angry. I'm really angry, Frank, and I don't know how to not be angry at you right now." Frank sat down. "Tell me how to fix this." "You can't, not right now. Maybe not ever. You violated my trust. You went to my wife with concerns that weren't real. And the worst part is, you didn't even think it was wrong. You genuinely believed you were helping. That's what scares me about you, Frank. You think your intentions justify your actions. But they don't." "I was worried about you," Frank said again. "Then worry. But keep it to yourself. Or better yet, if you're really worried about me, talk to me. Don't talk to Jeanie. Don't talk to Sammy. Don't talk to anyone else. Talk to me directly." Frank nodded. "Okay, you're right. I should have come to you first. You shouldn't have come to anyone. Because there's no problem to address. But you can't help yourself, can you? You have to manage everything. You have to control everything. Even things that have nothing to do with you. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me something, Frank. When was the last time you let someone else make a decision without giving them your opinion? When was the last time you stayed out of someone else's business?" Frank didn't have an answer for that. Dean picked up his suitcase. "I'm going home. I'm going to spend time with my wife and my kids, and I'm going to try to forget that my best friend thinks I'm a drunk who can't control himself." "How long are you going to punish me for this?" Frank asked. Dean stopped at the door. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Will you call me when you're ready?" Dean looked back at him. "I don't know. Maybe. We'll see." Dean left. Frank sat alone in the dressing room for a long time. He thought about what Dean had said, about control, about management, about the way Frank inserted himself into other people's lives, whether they wanted him there or not. And Frank realized, sitting there in that empty room, that Dean was right. Frank did try to control everything. It's how he had survived. It's how he had built his career. He made decisions and he made them quickly, and he expected everyone around him to fall in line. And most of the time, they did. But Dean Martin wasn't most people. 3 weeks passed. Frank called Dean's house twice. Both times Jeanie answered and said Dean wasn't available. Frank didn't know if that meant Dean wasn't home or if it meant Dean was home but didn't want to talk. Either way, the message was clear. Dean was still angry. Frank tried to focus on work. He had recording sessions. He had a movie to shoot. He stayed busy, but the absence of Dean Martin in his life was noticeable. He would think of something funny and reach for the phone to call Dean before remembering that Dean wasn't taking his calls. He would be at a restaurant and see someone who reminded him of Dean. He would hear a song they had performed together and feel a pang of something that felt uncomfortably like grief. In early November, Frank was at a party in Beverly Hills. It was some producer's birthday. The usual crowd, actors and directors and executives all pretending to be friends. Frank was standing by the bar when he saw Dean walk in. Their eyes met across the room. Frank raised his glass slightly, a peace offering. Dean nodded, just a small nod, but it was acknowledgement. It was something. Later, Frank found Dean on the terrace. Dean was smoking a cigarette, looking out at the Los Angeles lights. Frank stood next to him. They didn't say anything for a while. Finally, Frank spoke. "How's Jeanie?" "She's fine. She asked me to talk to you." Yeah, she said I was being too hard on you. She said you were just trying to look out for me, and that while you went about it the wrong way, your heart was in the right place." Frank smiled slightly. "Smart woman, the smartest. That's why I married her." They were quiet again. Then Dean said, "I'm not drinking less, Frank, just so you know. I still have scotch with dinner. I still have a drink before shows. I'm not going to change my life because you're worried. I understand. Do you?" "I'm trying to." Dean flicked his cigarette over the railing. "Here's the thing, Frank. You and me, we're different. You need to control everything because that's how you feel safe. I need to not be controlled because that's how I feel safe. So when you try to manage my life, even with good intentions, it makes me feel trapped. And I can't function when I feel trapped." Frank nodded. "I get that, I do. And I'm sorry. Not just sorry I called Jeanie. Sorry that I made you feel like I don't respect your choices." Dean looked at him. "I know you respect me. I know you care about me. But caring about someone doesn't give you the right to run their life." "You're right. It doesn't, so can you stop?" Frank thought about that. Could he stop? Could he see Dean making choices Frank didn't agree with and just keep his mouth shut? It went against every instinct Frank had. but losing Dean's friendship wasn't an option. I can try. Dean smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. That's all I'm asking. Try. They stood there on the terrace for a while longer. Then Dean said, "We've got that thing at the Copa next month. Yeah, you still want to do it? If you do." Dean nodded. "Okay, we'll do it. But Frank, if you ever call Jeanie with some bullshit concern again, I'm out. Not just out of the show. Out of the friendship. You understand?" "I understand." They went back inside together. The party continued around them. People came up to shake their hands, to tell them how great they were, to bask in the glow of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin being in the same room. And Frank and Dean played their parts. They laughed. They told stories. They acted like nothing had happened. Because that's what you did. You put on a show. You kept the darkness private. You made everyone believe the myth. But that night on the terrace, something had shifted between them. They had both said things that needed to be said. They had both acknowledged the fundamental difference in how they operated. And they had both agreed to try to make it work anyway. Because the alternative, not having each other in their lives, was unacceptable. The friendship continued. Frank performed with Dean dozens more times over the years. They had other fights, other moments of tension. But Frank never called Jeanie again. Never went behind Dean's back. When he was worried about Dean, which was often, he either said it directly or kept it to himself. Years later, in 1987, after Dean's son died and Dean stopped performing, Frank tried to get Dean to come back, tried to convince him to do the reunion tour. Dean agreed, but his heart wasn't in it. And when Dean walked off stage in Chicago and flew home, Frank didn't try to stop him. Didn't call Jeanie to ask her to talk sense into Dean. Didn't manage or control or fix. He just let Dean go. Because Frank had finally learned what Dean had tried to teach him in 1958, that loving someone means respecting their choices, even when you don't agree, even when you think they're making a mistake, even when every instinct tells you to interfere. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is nothing. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. Frank spoke at the funeral. He stood at the podium and looked out at the packed church and said, "Dean Martin was my best friend, not because we agreed on everything, not because we always saw eye to eye, but because he taught me that friendship means letting people be who they are, not who you think they should be." I didn't always learn that lesson well, but I tried, because Dean was worth trying for. After the funeral, someone asked Frank about the early days in Vegas, about the Rat Pack and the Sands and all those legendary shows, and Frank said something he had never said before. He said, "The secret to our friendship wasn't that we were similar. It was that Dean had the courage to tell me when I was wrong, and I had the wisdom, eventually, to listen." That was the truth of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Not the myth of two cool guys who drank and sang and made it all look easy, but the reality of two complicated men who loved each other enough to fight, to draw boundaries, to say hard things, to hurt each other and forgive each other and keep showing up anyway, because that's what real friendship looks like. Not perfect harmony, but two people learning to sing together even when they're in different keys,